Good afternoon, everyone. It is exactly 1 o'clock, and so we want to start our workshop to discuss the draft fund estimate as well as the draft guidelines that were presented to the Commission at the June Commission meeting. We will be using those documents that were presented at the meeting, so those are posted on our website. PowerPoint presentations that are utilized for this workshop will also be posted on our website after this workshop. So if you want to go back, then you can always download it from there. So with that, we will start. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Our favorite thing to do is workshops, I guess. So this will be an opportunity for all of us to have input on the fund estimate, and as well as the STIP guidelines and the proposed changes I'm proposing to make. At the end of the workshop, I will briefly go to when is the deadline to submit comments and what are the next steps. Before I get started, though, I'd like to turn it over to Justin Hall so that he can, provide give us information as to how you all can participate. And so, Justin.
Thank you, Teresa. Welcome to today's STIP Fund Estimate and Guidelines Workshop. We welcome comments from the public as a part of each item at this meeting. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as early into the item as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. For participants joining us through the GoToWebinar system, please find the webinar panel likely located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handouts tab. Under the audio tab, attendees will have the choice to listen in via computer or telephone option. There are two options for participants to provide comments on agenda items. Click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Alternately, you may use the questions tab, type in the agenda item, number you are commenting on, and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. Thank you again for joining us today. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you sharing some of it with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Again, we want you to participate. If you can't think of any question, if you think of questions after the workshop, I'm always available. You can send me a note, you can call me, or email is a lot easier, so that will be great. So all our contact information is at the bottom. And so with that, we're going to start with our first, the first topic, which is going to be the fund estimate. And I'm going to turn it over to Keith so he can share the wonderful fund estimate that he prepared for us. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Teresa. Good afternoon, happy Monday. Again, Keith Duncan with Caltrans Division of Budgets, and today I get to share, or at least introduce the team that's involved in the development of the fund estimate. As everyone knows, the fund estimate is a 5-year document. It's intended to forecast all of the resources that are going to be available for the next 5-year period to establish the program funding levels for both the STIP and the SHOP. Much of the fund estimate development process is dictated in statute with some flexibility to be able to apply various assumptions, and that's where we get to our assumptions document that was recently approved by the Commission. The process formally begins at the January Commission meeting, where we provide an introduction of the fund estimate development process. We then proceed to provide the draft assumptions. Once those are approved, we would then present at the June meeting the draft fund estimate for consideration and then planned eventual adoption in August. One of the best parts about having this workshop, not only to share more of the details about the fund estimate development process, but to also introduce critical or key members of the Caltrans budgets team that are involved in the development of the fund estimate. Most of the time you get to see me at the Commission meetings giving presentations, but it's the subject matter experts that I get to introduce here momentarily. They and their teams they're the main superstars when it comes to development of the fund estimate process every 2 years. The first person I want to introduce, Matt Ruggiero. He is our Division of Budgets Fund Estimate Manager. He is responsible for developing of the STIP fund estimate. He's been in this position just under a year. With Matt being relatively new to the position, he brings a lot of new ideas, fresh perspective to be able to strengthen the fund estimate development process. Matt, prior to his current role, was an analyst within our RFAB, Revenue Forecast and Fiscal Analysis team. So he has intricate knowledge in the details for the fund estimate development process. So Matt has been doing a great job. While we formally started introducing and presenting at the commission meeting in January, Matt's fund estimate development processes are year-round. He's constantly looking at prior fund estimate periods and the models that were used and looking to strengthen or improve them so we can do everything we can to make those funding available for the next 5 years. So I'm happy to have Matt provide some of the presentation today. The second presenter, Garrett Franklin. He is our branch chief over our revenue forecast team. Not only does Garrett oversee the fund estimate development process, but he also oversees the monitoring of our state revenue sources, as well as oversees the forecasting for our major transportation accounts for SHA, RMRA, and the others. Prior to that, Garrett actually held the position that Matt's in, so he was the previous fund estimate manager as well. So he's gone through a couple cycles, so he's able to manage and kind of predict what the ebbs and flows of the overall process is. So with Garrett and Matt, they provide a wealth of knowledge, wealth of expertise, and they're definitely two folks that I'm proud to introduce as being the critical team members for the development of the fund estimate that was shared in June and looking to continue to improve as we go to adoption, for planned adoption in August. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Garrett and Matt to take over the presentation, and we'll be available throughout for any questions. Garrett.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Keith. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So the way that we wanted to kind of kick off the workshop is to provide a little bit of context to the main revenue force or factor that kind of drives the resources that are going to be available during the fund estimate cycle. For better or for worse, probably the most interesting thing this cycle is how dramatic the impact of COVID-19 was, especially to the consumption of gasoline. And so this is a quarterly look beginning in April through June of 2019 that shows the 3-month total of consumption as reported by the CDTFA. That's the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration. They were formerly the Board of Equalization. But what's most notable is between April and June of 2020, we see that dramatic drop in consumption. And then that following quarter, there is a increase, kind of a bounce back per se, but it's still at a notably lower level than what we witnessed during those summer months in 2019. And since that period of time, we've kind of seen it flatline. It's actually looking like it was down a little bit. The last data point that's being reflected here is January through March of 21. The reason for that is that the information provided by CDTFA is from a couple months ago. It takes them a little bit of time to compile all the information from the different gasoline and diesel suppliers, make sure that everything's vetted, and then release that information publicly. So, what I can say kind of anecdotally is that consumption has been increasing in the last couple months, but we actually do not see that just yet in publicly available information. Next slide, please. So just to put that into context, what this slide is showing is the change in gasoline consumption beginning in 2006, 2007. And again, you can see that dramatic drop in fiscal year 2019, and then to an even greater degree in fiscal year 2020. Those out years are a projection. I'll kind of go into that in a little bit more detail in a couple slides. But this kind of paints the picture of where we were over, the last 12, 13 years or so, and then an idea of where the state thinks it's headed in the future. Next slide, please. And then, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention diesel at all. This is the quarterly look over the last 2 calendar years. I guess word on the street is diesel would probably not be impacted as much as consumption of gasoline due to goods movement across the state. Obviously, when a lot of people were sheltering in place, They were utilizing, delivery services, Amazon, and then also, other alternatives to, say, just going to a store or the mall traditionally to purchase their goods. So we do see that there were some fluctuations, and in April and June, it was the lowest, but then it did move up slightly, and then it's only down a little bit in this last quarter. So both gasoline and diesel are very important as driving factors of the fund estimate, because outside of federal resources, it is the main revenue stream, and diesel accounts for an awful lot less of the total revenue that the state receives for pretty obvious reasons. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of an explanation of the fund estimate methodology. What happens is the beginning balances for the respective accounts then have the anticipated revenues added to them. And that's kind of the function of a multi-month process that culminated in the assumptions that were approved recently that Keith had mentioned back during the May meeting. And we work collaboratively with commission and commission staff to provide the information and the additional detail, as well as providing some options for some of those main revenue sources over the fund estimate period, which, as Keith mentioned, is a 5-year document with fiscal year 21-22 being the base year, and then 5 years beyond that. From that, non-program commitments, so this is the support, maintenance, the ongoing operations, are reduced from those revenues, as well as the existing program commitments. I'll go into a tad bit more detail about that in one of the next slides, but essentially you have your starting balance, your additional revenues that you're projecting, and then you're reducing out the ongoing costs, and then you're further subtracting out the existing commitments. And then what you have left available is what becomes the basis for the capacity and programming over that next 5-year period. Next slide, please. Going back to consumption, this is a pretty nifty slide that shows not only the relative adjustment in consumption, but also the percent change. And the reason why we've included this here is because this denotes, it basically draws, the chalk mark, the line in the sand of the start of the fund estimate period and what the expectation is based on the projections currently available over the fund estimate period. And so what we see if we look on the right side of this slide is the sort of tail end of the quote unquote rebound in 22-23 with a 1% increase, followed
Garrett, we lost audio, so Keith, did you lose audio? We lost audio in our end, so I'm not sure if it's us or your end.
Can you hear me okay, Teresa?
I can hear you, Keith. I just can't hear Garrett anymore. Did you lose audio with him as well?
That's what I'm just doing, a quick text job, and then I will, if anything, we can jump on, and between Matt and myself, we can continue the presentation.
Yeah, so just for everyone that is listening to us, we lost audio with Garrett, so we're.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes, we can. Yay! Oh man,
wow. Well, I apologize for that.
So and you were in the interesting part too. It's like a movie. All of a sudden, you turn it. I was like, whoa.
Well, thank you. So
pause to go get the popcorn.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly start over with this slide, just in case it cut off, at some point in the middle of it. But essentially, the reason why we've included this slide is this draws that focal point of when the fund estimate period starts, and fiscal year 22-23 is when we're seeing the tail end of that rebound, followed by between a 1% and just under a 2% decrease in gasoline consumption over those final 5 years of the fund estimate period. Next slide, please. And so what this is reflecting is the overall primary revenue sources for both the STIP and the SHOP. And it's delineated between your federal funds, your base excise taxes for gasoline and diesel, your multitude of Senate Bill 1 revenues, and then finally the incremental excise tax, which I'll go into with a pie chart slide next. But what this is indicating is over the fund estimate period, revenues are increasing, total revenues year over year, but that starting off point is less than what was projected in the 2020 fund estimate due to the pandemic. Obviously, when the fund estimate in 2020 was adopted, nobody was aware of the pandemic. Next slide, please. Okay, incremental excise tax breakdown. So what this is displaying is how the projected incremental excise specific to fiscal year 21-22, but we wouldn't expect to see any dramatic shifts in the percentages, how it's distributed, basically. Just over half of it is associated with debt service, that ongoing amount of resources that are used to pay for transportation bonds, followed by an equal portion of what's left over that's divided between the STIP and goes directly to local streets and roads. And then finally, we have that small
we lost you again, Garrett. So we're
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Oh, perfect.
So,
thank you.
yep, so I believe I have one more slide after this, and then I'll transition it over to Matt to finish. But
Okay.
essentially, just over half of the incremental excise tax is associated with the ongoing payment of transportation bonds. And then there's an equal portion left over that's divvied up between STIP, and then it goes directly to local streets and roads. That final 6% is what's devoted in statute to SHOP. Next slide, please. And then specific to the PTA, similar to the slide about the fund estimate methodology, each year you receive diesel sales tax, transportation improvement fees, subtracted by these set-asides, and I won't go into detail, especially if I have more audio issues, but the lion's share of the resources are set aside in statute. There's a remaining amount available, and that needs to cover both the ongoing operations and supports, as well as the existing rail and mass transportation program. Similar to the fund estimate methodology slide, what's left over at the bottom is what becomes available for future capacity for STIP. Next slide. And then this is what was presented to the commission at the June meeting. And this is effectively a table of the target capacities for STIP and for SHOP. And then what's notable is probably 5 lines down from the top as well as near the bottom, you see the actual 2020 SHOP and STIP program amounts. And the net difference and the cumulative difference become what's available for the future fund estimate. In this case, 2022. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Matt to finish the presentation. Thank you, and I apologize for the audio issues.
Thank you, Garrett. Matt, are you around? You're off. Yeah, you're off mute, but we cannot hear you, Matt. So I'm not sure, Keith, if you are around available. So, oh, okay, okay.
So specific to STIP, the 2022 fund estimate, projected revenues are about $478 million less. The primary reason for that was COVID-19 and specifically gasoline consumption that I kind of discussed earlier. STIP commitments, we see that there's an increase of 13 million. All things said over the FE period, pretty negligible. For the programming capacity, that's at $2 billion, which is a decrease of $546 million as compared to the prior fund estimate cycle. It lists here, it is due to both less revenue and then also the adjustment that we use to basically account for the cash flow within the fund estimate assumptions and then how it's cash flowed. Next slide, please. And then we just wanted to include a slide specific to the aeronautics account. This is assuming that there is a full annual credit amount of $1.5 million that goes each year in the amount of, I believe, $10,000 per airport, times the number of airports that are out there in the state of California. And it also assumes that there's going to be a $2.5 million annual transfer from the local airport account into the aeronautics account through fiscal year 23-24. And the net of all of that is about $9.5 million that's going to be available for allocation over the 5-year period. And it's just worth noting that that amount is contingent upon those annual transfers from the local airport loan account. Next slide. Next steps, changes and updates are considered. We obviously work collaboratively with commission staff, and that would be all the way up until the August meeting. And depending upon the outcome of that meeting, all the changes are going to be, reported and conveyed prior to publishing. And the adoption is the presentation for possible adoption is set for August 18th. That said, there is a statute. It can be delayed up to 90 days if the commission chooses to do so. Next slide, please. And with that, we'll turn it over if anybody has any questions.
Any questions? Any questions, Justin?
Teresa, I see no one from the public indicating they wish to make a comment at this time.
Okay, well, that was a great presentation. I always find it very informative and very useful. And so as you can imagine, we are eagerly waiting for these numbers in order for us to calculate the shares. So I'm gonna ask Casey if she can bring it up. Meanwhile, we do have a question. So don't go away, Garrett or Keith and Matthew, so that we answer the question. So go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, Teresa. Up first, we have Kenneth Powell. Kenneth, you're free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Kenneth Powell with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I have actually 3 questions for Caltrans staff on the fund estimate. The first is, and I think I brought this up a while ago, but I was curious why this fund estimate doesn't have APDE like it did in prior cycles, or I guess in the 2018 STIP. That was the last time we had APDE.
Keith and Gary, you want to take a shot, or do you want me to answer that? Because
I'm going to defer to you.
Okay, that is something we do discuss at every fund estimate, and the reason why we did not have a PDE is because of the amount of funding that is available. As you recall, in the 2018 STIP, we had just come from the 2016 STIP, which was a very tiny STIP because of the deletions and delays we had to do. And so when the 2018 came, it was a very large STIP. We hadn't seen a $2 billion STIP of additional revenue. So we anticipated having that level of STIP moving forward. So we thought it was a good idea to do APDE, because what happens with APDE is that we borrow against the future. So as a result of the APDE that we did in 2018, the 2020 STIP was reduced by that amount, which was about 200 million. And so with COVID, with the anticipated reduced in revenues, we kind of did not want to commit future revenues at this point. With that said, we're hoping that, you know, in the 2024 STIP, we have more stability, and we can consider APD. I do understand the value of APD because that is really a tool for you to start developing your project so that you are competitive for other programs that only fund construction. But I feel that the STIP, because of the size, I do not want to commit the STIP in that form. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that helps. Thank you. Actually, that answered my second question. So my third question, oh, I'm sorry, is you know, based on the budget that was signed, I understand there's going to be, you know, some new revenues, hopefully, pending some trailer bills. So I was curious what the commission or Caltrans's position on including those additional revenues in the fund estimate. I know you're planning to adopt it in August, but you can defer up to 90 days. And my understanding, Teresa, if you remind me, if once you adopt, you cannot make any changes to the fund estimate, right, for like 90 days or a year or something. So we want to get this right when you adopt. So I'm curious how the state budget factors in.
I don't think there's any money that's been slated for the STIP, but I don't know if Paul is on the line or Keith can jump in. I would love it. I think it makes sense. I think it will be supported. And you know me, I was like, yes, but at this point, I do not think there is anything identified. Thank you, Keith.
Well, Teresa, just to back your statement up, everything that we're aware of when it comes to the ongoing negotiations for subsequent budget bills that could be coming forward, none of it has been identified to going directly to the STIP, so that's why we would be taking those into account. Items such as the ATP and adaptation that we know are still requiring subsequent legislation, those are dedicated other programs outside of the STIP and the shop, so that's why we wouldn't be looking to add those in or for consideration for this cycle. But very good question, thank you.
That is, and I think I would support that. So if anybody can carry that message, it would be greatly appreciated, because I think the STIP is a great program for us to. It's the most equitable program in my view, but you all know how I feel about the STIP. So is there more questions? Okay, Justin, we have one more question.
Yes, up next we got Rachel Morricone.
Hi guys, I wanted to ask some questions about the late fee, repayment, debt service, repayments, etc., and just see how far into chipping away at that we are, and you know, are we going to be using 50% of the incremental gas tax, excise gas tax for debt service for the foreseeable future, and what opportunity or why it's set at 52%? Is that the actual debt service that's owed each year amounts, or just a little bit, if anyone could provide some more info on that?
Yeah, so I can provide some background to that. That's a great question. So my understanding is that for the foreseeable future, barring a change in law, and you know, I can also say that just before Senate Bill 1 kind of became the cornerstone in 2017, there was talk amongst the legislature of finding some ways to either adjust or outright eliminate the late fee backfill. I'm not sure if that's, you know, maybe picking up some steam again, but barring any adjustment to statute, the late fee revenue would continue to be diverted to pay debt service on transportation bonds. The debt service itself is increasing. The way that they were structured and the timing of them, those debt service payments are actually moving up as opposed to moving down. And so as long as the amount of debt service that's ultimately paid by the state is in excess of those late fees that are paid each year, you know, at time of registration, my understanding is that it would continue to be used for debt service. Now, as far as it being 52%, that's a really insightful question. That percentage is going to be based on the total amount of incremental excise tax that's collected over a year, and then what percentage of that in weight fees is collected. So if more people are out there on the road and they're purchasing more gasoline, the total incremental excise tax is going to be greater, whereas short of registrations of vehicles that require weight fee payments going down, that's, I think, projected only to increase by a very small margin. So one could say the weight fee revenue is relatively inelastic, and with shocks like we saw with COVID and the pandemic, gasoline consumption can vary far more dramatically. So I wouldn't expect to see the weight fee debt service piece go down to say 20% or 10%, but it can technically vary from that 52% depending upon how much gasoline is consumed over the year. I hope that answers the question.
It sort of does. So if I'm looking at the yellow handout or whatever, I guess it's the first page where it shows weight fees 0, that's because that's what's available after the weight fees have been collected to go in here that aren't otherwise. Correct. And then the fuel excise taxes, that about $2 billion a year, that's after taking the debt service off. So otherwise that number would be closer to $4 billion a year, sorry.
Yeah, so what's available for STIP specifically, you are correct. It would be net of that amount.
Thanks.
Very, very sad, huh?
Yeah, it'd be great if they used some of the extra revenue to just clear out some of that old debt. And not
right.
From this debt.
That would be ideal. But okay, do we have more questions, Justin? We do. I would think so, but I will turn it over to Keith and Garrett.
I actually didn't hear the question.
I didn't either, I'm sorry. Are you hearing it, Teresa? Because we're not.
Sorry, I'm not.
Yeah, well, what it says is that as we move forward with zero emission vehicles, will the revenues decline? Yeah. Okay, right?
Yes. With the further increase in the number of zero emission vehicles, lower gas consumption, we would continue to see that consumption decline. That's why I know both the Commission and Caltrans continue their efforts, along with Cal, the Transportation Agency, regarding a road charge program for an alternative revenue source. But that's still some time out. But for now, we do anticipate, and that's what the numbers do show when it comes to the forecasting, is that the consumption is declining, and that would be attributable to zero emission vehicles, increased fuel efficiency, and similar items.
Right, and that is really the risk with the STIP as to how the STIP is funded, is that the outlook of the STIP doesn't look very rosy, and so as we have more efficiencies, then the revenues unfortunately will keep on going down, and so hopefully something something will happen in the next few years. Otherwise, the expectation is really that the STIP will continue to be smaller and smaller.
Yeah, similar to the previous question that in regards to the weight fees, a lot of that is dictated by statute, so that's why we're using the numbers accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Keith. If we have no more questions on the actual revenue side, I'd like to just briefly go over the shares and the calculation of the shares. And so this is what we actually presented to the Commission at the June Commission meeting. As you know, the shares are calculated based on population and based on center highway lane miles. And so one of the challenges we had it's a really weird time because of the 2020 census information is not yet available to us. We had to use the 2010, and you know, we went back to the 2010 STIP and the 2012 STIP to see how that was calculated, and they had the same issue. So I was like, okay, we don't feel as bad. Let's use 2022 census information. And so the population didn't change. The center highway, the highway lane miles did. Like every year, we add some, we remove some, but the overall ratio is very slightly changed just because the formula distribution, it is based on 75% weighted for population and 25 for the highway lane miles. And so I guess the good news with the fund estimate, as it was presented in earlier discussion, is that we do have a positive fund estimate of $727 million for the 5-year period. But you know, as expected, it is only in the last 2 years of the STIP. Now, I just kind of want to make sure that you realize that when we did prepare the shared distribution, our basis is it's always the orange book. How we ended the year and how we're going to be reporting in the orange book. So the beginning balance and the ending balance, the advances, and the unprogrammed share balances are based always on the orange book. And in the June commission meeting, we still had not fully, we had a pretty finalized orange book, but we're still cleaning it up based on votes that the commission took. So, and then this time we had 2 June meetings. So everything is based on the actions that happened up to June. There is going to be a small change. It's not very much, but in the base year, we are going to have a small negative because of a project that we advanced and we hadn't captured. It's only, it's going to be a $12 million negative in the first year. So the shares will be adjusted. So when we're done with the presentation, we will be posting a revised share distribution. It is very, very small because, you know, I have to divide it amongst all 58 counties plus Tahoe, as well as the interregional program. And so the impact to your region is going to be very, very slight. So because also, as you know, we have a 4-year share period and we have a 5-year a STIP. And so normally the base year closes a share period. And because we do not have new funding for the base year, we have nothing to distribute. And so we don't need to meet a minimum because we don't have enough funding, new funding on the first 2 years, which is when the share period ends. I know the share period is really the most kind of hard to understand, and it is actually the most difficult to figure out because we have to close a share period and we have to make sure we meet your minimum based on the share period. But because we have no base because of the funding limitations, we're not. So all the new funding really is only going to be available in the last 2 years of the STIP. What that means is that new projects, unless it's only going to have to be in year 25, 26, 26, 27. All these, the target, that's what's it's going to be then. And so if you have a project, a new project that you want to add in the first 3 years of the STIP, you have to have another project to delay. We have to be constrained by the fund estimate, and that's really the only way we can program new projects in the first 3 years of the STIP. The challenge is going to be for the projects that have cost increases that are in the first 3 years of the STIP. Hopefully we'll have enough delays that we can accommodate those. but if not, then we may have to delay your project. So just kind of giving you all the heads up that we don't really have capacity in the first 3 years of the STIP. Before, we used to kind of have a tiny little capacity in order to accommodate cost increases, but at this point, we really don't. So yeah, that's really all I kind of wanted to share with you on the shares. So that's all I have on the shares in the distribution. I have one question, so I'm gonna turn it over to Justin.
Thank you, Teresa. We have one written question at this time coming from Carl Anderson. He writes, do fund estimate tables sent out with the workshop material capture those small changes? Fund estimate tables are dated July 14th, or should we expect more changes?
Oh, okay. No, July 14th does show the change. What happened was that when we recalculated, once we did the orange book, we calculated the revised shares and we posted it online. And then I thought maybe it's not a good idea because we need to base it on what was public as of June. So you are correct. It is the 7/14th. And so then I don't know if you rechecked, but we have the old share distribution. So yeah, you have the most up-to-date information, Carl. So as you can see from the one that we presented, from the one dated 6/24 to now, the change is very, very small. So it doesn't impact your region very much. Maximum, I do want to mention the maximum. A lot of regions do propose up to the maximum, and we are not really obligated to program to the maximum. The only way we can program to the maximum is if other regions program below their target, as in every year. We have to, we balance the programming statewide, and so as in that's always how we do it. If you program above your target, someone else has to program below their target. So that is really the only way we can go up to the maximum. I think that's all I have. In regards to the COVID relief funds, I want to make sure we are clear. These shares do not include COVID relief. As you recall, we said those were going to be kept independently and separate. The reason for that is because the COVID relief funds do have an expiration date. And if you did not use, you did not program and allocate your projects by a certain date, which I think we have, it was September 2023 or 24, yeah, 24. The funds go away. And so we will not, unlike your regular shares that it's a running total if you do not use them, if you lapse your funds, you eventually get them back. Not with the COVID relief. Those are use it or lose them, and we have a deadline. So those are kept separate. We calculated a PPM for those as well. And if you do not use the PPM, that is gonna go away as well. And so I know some of you had questions whether or not these, the shares were included the COVID relief, and so they do not. So when you do your RTIP, if you want to program your COVID relief shares, you have to separate them in the fund source and just maybe have a different section. I will work with your the chair of the RTPA group and your vice chair, because there is a template that you guys normally put together to prepare your RTIP. And I think if you add another section on COVID relief funds would be really good. That way they are identified separately. Okay, so with that, I kind of just want to go over the PPM limitations. PPM that we calculated for the STIP includes the PPM that we distributed in the 2020 STIP for the as for the 2020 for year 24-25. Year 2024-25 was the last year of the 2020 STIP, and it was part of the new share period. So if you guys remember, we have two columns, one for the prior share period and the other one for the new share period, and it was only 1 year. So this was added here. So the total PPM that is calculated includes what you have already programmed in year 24-25. So the difference is what you can add in PPM. And with that, I think I am done talking about shares and the wonderful and beautiful shares. We have a question. Okay, Justin?
Yes, we have one written question at this time. They ask, can you please confirm what the capacity is for the STIP?
Oh, yes. The capacity for the STIP is, let me look, 714. The new capacity is 743 million. If you scroll down, can you scroll down, Casey, on that sheet? Scroll down. No, well, there, you can scroll down. Just scroll down at the bottom. We want to show the bottom. See, it says 727,761. That is the new, that is the old capacity, because as you remember, I have I have adjustments. The new capacity is going to be 743 million. So does that answer the question? What is the new capacity? 727. Yeah. And remember, it is only available in the last 2 years of the STIP. We have the first 3 years of the STIP is kind of pretty much all committed. Okay.
At this time, we have one attendee with their hand raised, Rachel Marconi. Oh, she just lowered her hand. Rachel, go ahead.
Against it, but no, you actually answered my question, which was about the COVID relief money. But maybe there's an idiosyncrasy that I could ask you about, and maybe that'll be resolved later. But so if we want to use some of our PPM money on our COVID PPM money on, say, PPM tasks in fiscal year 25-26, but then we also want to use some of our regular STIP money in that same year for PPM, you want us to have two different spreadsheets that show the two different amounts, and yes, we would get two different allocations for those rather than
no, it will be one allocation, but in the vote box it would show, it would kind of be separated. The COVID relief funds have an expiration date, and we need to make sure those are utilized. Now, COVID, remember, whether it is through a regular project, a capital project, or PPM, they have to be used by a certain date. Sure. So if you have, like, for example, regular PPM and COVID PPM, you're gonna show it in a PPR as two fund sources. I know it's gonna look weird, but because we need to track those and make sure that we are able to kind of track them and carry a balance and zero it out as they're being utilized.
Okay, great. And can you just clarify one thing you said about PPM? If you guys could go to page 11 of the PDF, that'd be great. So at the top there, I think what I heard you say was for fiscal year 24-25, that includes our capacity of what we've already programmed. This isn't the new amounts. And so that final column there sums everything up.
Yes.
Is this just new stuff, or this is total for everything that we've programmed in 2020 as well as the new stuff?
Yes. So 24-25 is part of the share period that we're in from the last tip. So I'm going to use Alameda as an example. Okay. So for Alameda, we calculated PPM on the new STIP on the new share distribution of 11,315,000. So that was, if you look at your 2020 fund estimate share distribution, you will see that in a dollar amount for that PPM. So now the new share distribution is for Alameda is 19.818, which is in the prior pages as their target. So combine those, it's 31,133,000. So 5% of that is 1.557. But remember, Alameda already programmed a portion of that, which is 5% of the 11,315 in the 2020 STIP. So whatever the difference is, that is the new PPM that they can program in those fiscal years.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. It's kind of technical, and it's just kind of really difficult to, and I must say, share periods are probably the most difficult to understand. And I had told, I don't recall, someone from a regional agency called me to kind of talk about share periods. And I know there's a lot of new folks on the STIP. And what I am going to do, we're going to post like the share periods and the years that the share periods covered and how the share periods land on a 5-year STIP, because it is a really, really difficult to understand, and that factors into what the base is, what the target is, and what the maximum is, and also what the 5% PPM limitations are. So we'll post that. It's a graphic that you can see when it ends, and I always have to refer to it. So I think it will be useful for everyone that kind of has questions on the share periods as they relate to the 5-year STIP period. So if we have no more questions, oh, we do have one more question. So.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. This written question comes from Richard Tippett. He asks, can we swap out COVID STIP funds for a project programmed in next year's cycle? If you can, does this mean you have to wait for the next STIP cycle to have access to reprogram the funds that were swapped out?
Okay, so if you have a current project that is programmed with regular STIP and you want to swap it with COVID, yes, you can do that. You can put it in your RTEP and we can get it done then. And actually, that will be really cool. That way you want to get your COVID out of the way, okay? And I encourage regions to get their COVID relief funds that go through the STIP out of the way, just so that we don't run into a timing issue, because those do have an expiration date. Okay, that's a good question. Thank you, Rick. All right, so with that, I'm gonna turn it over to myself on the STIP guidelines. I was gonna say, who am I gonna turn it over to? Well, myself. But just the STIP guidelines, and so if you can, the specific guidelines, please. Just real quickly, the schedule, okay? So I'm gonna go over the specific guidelines, and then I'm gonna go over the changes I'm proposing to the permanent guidelines. So this is the schedule I am proposing. Just that a lot of the dates are statutorily driven, and so some of these dates are not really. So for example, the draft ITIP is due to the commission on October 15th. I put there October 4th, just so that we could possibly have a hearing on October 14th, which is a commission meeting date. So that is the reason I have the hearing schedule on the 14th, because historically we've always had our hearings right after a commission meeting, just so that we can make it easier for folks to travel, be able to attend the commission meeting. Now, because we are in a virtual world, this may not even be an issue. I am not really sure whether or not we're going to have an in-person meeting. And that is the reason why I had it on the 14th with the next hearing on the 21st. But we're still working on those dates, and so the draft ITIP and as well as the hearing dates for the draft ITIP may change a little bit. Statute requires the hearings be prior to November 15th. So technically we have up to November 15th to have the hearings. So those dates could or could not change. We will know in the next week or two. Then, as you know, the RTIPs, the final RTIPs and the final ITIP is due to the commission on the 15th. That's a statutory deadline. And then the next deadline is really when March 1st, which is when the STIP needs to be adopted. That is under certain circumstances, the STIP can be delayed if there are changes to the fund estimate that changes the outlook altogether of the STIP. As you recall, that's what happened in the 2016 STIP. We don't anticipate any changes in statute that we would have to delay the adoption of the STIP from April 1st. So we kind of then have to, the date, we always work on reverse to meet that deadline. So the STIP will be adopted at the March Commission meeting, the 23rd and the 24th. And then law requires that we make staff recommendations 20 days prior to the adoption, hence the February 28th deadline. So then we work backwards on the hearings. We are required to have a north and a south hearing. Again, we try to schedule one of the hearings right after a commission meeting for the same reasons that I stated earlier, so that we can make it easier on our partners to attend, to attend in person. So that is really the basis for the schedule. Any concerns on the schedule, please feel free to let me know. And like I said, right now, the only one that could or may not change is when the draft ITIP will be due to us. And it has to be, well, can't be any later than October 15th, and when we're having the draft ITIP hearings, okay? So if you scroll down, Casey, a lot of the things that are part in the specific guidelines, okay, before I get there, the specific guidelines is really specific to the STIP, and it normally is around the available funds. So I've already talked about most of the information as I was talking about the shares. And so sadly, we have zero PTA. I mean, if the 2020 STIP, the PTA was grim, this is even grimmer. Now it's dead as it relates to the STIP. Unfortunately, there is no PTA funding for the STIP. And as in prior years, what that means is that any transit projects have to be Article 19 eligible, as well as or federalized. And so we really need to make sure that your projects, if you're proposing any PTA, any transit projects, that they are state highway account eligible or federalized. If it's a very, very large project, you would have to federalize the project. On the next pages, let's see. I already talked about the shares. We don't have a base because we don't have enough funding. We have a target maximum. We already talked about that. And transit and rail, I already talked about that. And so PPM, I kind of went into a lot of detail on PPM. So if you scroll down to the bottom of that page, Casey, uncommitted funds. We left that language there because the STIP is a fund source that the competitive programs accept as a matching to provide a match. And so we did leave that language there. It does become a challenge to us because of the funding that is available in the STIP is in the last 2 years, and the funding on the other programs. But this was the first year we try to make it work because if you remember that in the 2018 STIP, we advanced a lot of projects in order to meet the schedule for the competitive programs. The 2020 STIP, we kind of were a little bit more strategic or strict, I would say. I think it is worthwhile to leave the language there and allow the regions the opportunity to, you know, compete for these funds. And if you're not successful, then you have a reasonable amount of time to identify another fund source. But I think it's still a good policy decision to include this uncommitted funding. I will never recommend this be part of a permanent guidelines because it has to be, I think it needs to be evaluated every step so that we make a determination every step whether or not it is a good idea. So moving down, oh, we have a question.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. We've got one written question at this time. Will there be any new performance measure output requirements added to the STIP guidelines? I understand that the Equity Roundtable is collaborating with the CTC and Caltrans on a performance metric. Is that something we'll see in the 2022 STIP guidelines?
Oh, that is a very, very good question. And you know what? No, because of the timing. If there are performance measures that are identified that are far and beyond or very different than what we have in the permanent guidelines, then it will not be impacting in this step. However, you know, that may be an issue as it relates to the competitive programs, because as you know, we are working on a performance metrics guidebook for the competitive programs that will eventually migrate to the STIP. So because we have nothing yet for the 2022 STIP, I'm not making any recommendations to update that section of the guidelines. Okay. So Casey, if you scroll down. Okay, commission expectations and priorities. Again, our priority is always going to be to meet our commitments from the 2020 STIP. So that is our #1 priority for these funds for the STIP. But because of the funding limitations, you know, we realize, as I said earlier, when we have cost increases, we may not be able to fulfill our commitment from the 2020. So we're just going to have to balance it and look at it. And as in prior, you know, as we're developing the STIP, you're never ever surprised. We always are going to have to tell you, this is what the issue is. We cannot accommodate, if your project is programmed in year 1 and you have a huge cost increase, and we may not be able to accommodate it. So we will continue working with you on that. We also updated, it's not really an update. We kind of, you know, in the past, I had never really touched the Governor Brown's executive order B1315, which relates to climate change and establishing an interim statewide greenhouse gas emissions target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 40, blah, blah, blah. That was codified later with SB 32. So that's still priority. If we have questions or when it comes to recommending projects, if we don't have enough funding and if you have more than your projects, and we may go to this priority of projects. Okay. I think that is all I wanted to cover on the specific guidelines, and we're going to go now to the permanent guidelines. So Casey, if you want to bring up that document. And what I am going to do is thank you. I'm just going to cover the changes that I am making. I did provide a link. I provided a link to the strike through and bold so that it's easier to follow for everyone. because the one we posted on our website is what was presented at the commission meeting. And unfortunately, because of ADA remediation, we are unable to identify, put it in strike through and bold. And that's, I know it's really difficult to follow just because it's such a large document. So the first change is in section 14, page 5. And I am adding clarifying language for PSRs and PSR equivalents. As you know, a PSR document is the scoping document. It is a very important document that determines the purpose and need, cost, scopes, and schedule. And we want to make sure every project has an adequate PSR or PSR equivalent. There is going to be a slight change, which is taking out a reference that it needs to be approved by a deputy director. As long as it's approved by a division chief or a district director, it is going to be sufficient. We just want to make sure that for a PSR equivalent, there is appropriate levels of approval. We never have a problem with a PSR that Caltrans prepares for their on-system projects, but it's always the PSR equivalent that either a local agency prepares or other modes. So we want to make sure that those are prepared by a registered engineer and the appropriate approvals are in place. We're also going to take out the reference of Union Pacific or BNSF. We don't think that is necessary, and instead we're just going to put private railroad for rail projects where the implementing agency is a private railroad. So that's the only change on the PSR and why we have that requirement. It is PSRs are important, and we want to make sure that when you submit your RTIP and the ITIP, it is part of the submittal of your final ITIP and RTIP. So, Casey, if you go to the next page, please. Oh, okay. I'll get to that question. I just kind of want to make sure we get to. If you go to the next page, the top of the next page, please. Okay. So there, I will be adding in the very last sentence of the first paragraph that the PSR or PSR equivalent or project report must be submitted with the final RTIP or ITIP. So that was a question I was asked. When will you require it? I go at time of adoption. No, I need to have it at the time the project is recommended for funding through your RTIP or ITIP. And we have a question on this section.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. This is actually in reference to section 12. Written comment comes from Patricia Chen. She asks, I just wanted to ask whether it might be possible to add integrated corridor management to TSM in section 12.
Patricia, that is a very good question, integrated corridor management. And I will work with my planning colleague and see if we can add something here on integrated corridor. What is it? Integrated corridor management. It's more of an operation tool, if I understand it correctly, but I will commit in looking into it for section 12. Okay, thank you. Any other up to section 14? Okay, I am going to now go to section 18, page 8. I did cross off that section because I just wanted to make sure that section was consistent with the minor projects in the shop. That's it. No other reason, just for consistency purposes. Now, in terms of the criteria, someone did have a question on the criteria for measuring performance and cost effectiveness. I am not proposing visiting this area at this point, but I want to make sure I will be looking in this section just to make sure that we have its consistency with federal requirements. I know a couple years ago we did visit this area and we talked about it at length, and I just want to make sure that this area is still consistent with federal requirements. Let me see, what else did I have here? I think that's it. So if I do make any changes to this or add anything, it's not going to be anything new that you do not know. It's just want to make sure that we are consistent with federal requirements. And I will send out if I do decide to make, if I do look into it and make any changes, okay? If we go to page 12, Casey, on the top of page 12, right before section 20. Next page. Okay, right there. We just added in another section, a sentence there to that paragraph on the very first, on the top of the page. The project level evaluation must explain how the project is consistent with Executive Order B3015, including a description of any actions taken to protect the state's most vulnerable populations. You know, with the current environment, I think it is very important that we always take these populations into consideration, okay? So then we go into the section 20. If you scroll down a little bit, Casey. Okay, submittal of the RTIP. On section 20, we are proposing to add section G to submittals of the RTIP. And the section we are proposing to add is a discussion of what the regions believe are the most significant interregional highway and intercity rail needs within the region. And then I reference section 34B, which is what I'm adding for the interregional program, as the most significant multimodal corridor deficiencies within the region, and any state routes within the region that might be potential candidates for highways to boulevard conversion pilot programs. So we want to be able to capture and document as the state continues to move forward, and what are the needs based on a regional perspective for these sections. We just want to make sure these don't get lost. And so before I open the discussion on this section, I'd like to go over section 34B, C, and D, because those are a little bit more developed, and I'm referencing them here. So if you go to page, Casey, if you go to page, let's see, page 23, 34B. So this is what we added for the interregional program. Again, one of the main purposes is that we make sure that these don't get lost, and the needs be addressed. And so under 34B, we are recommending that the interregional highway intercity rail needs be identified. Identify projects that have previously received ITIP funds in the last 10 years of pre-construction phases, but not have been fully funded through construction. Detailing consequences of not completing these projects, such as safety, environmental, economic evaluation, emergency response, or congestion impacts. Then the second section I added was the interregional multimodal corridor deficiencies. The ITIP shall develop an assessment of functional gaps within priority interregional facilities identified in the approved ITSP. In particular, the ITSP should identify deficiencies within the interregional multimodal corridors, such as corridor gaps in interregional rail facilities, Corridor has gaps in the interregional roadway facilities. Corridor has geographically limited congestion issues. Go to the next page, please. Corridor has an HOV lane that is degraded. Then we have, because of such a big ask, we're also saying that in the 2024 STIP, the commission expects this assessment to be expanded to include all state highways that are specific in streets and highways code section 16410 through 16420. You know, I know at this point Caltrans does have some comments to make, and I'd like to invite Marlon if he wants to chime in at this point on these particular sections.
All right, can you see and hear me?
We can see you, Marlon.
Okay, I appreciate it. So what's the easiest way to do this? Teresa, do you want to start off with like section 20G? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so in regards to section 20G, so this section focuses on requiring regional agencies to identify interregional needs. And given Caltrans' statutory role in planning and managing the interregional transportation system, and working and coordinating with partner agencies to identify interregional needs, the section seems to be a bit redundant. We do work with and coordinate with the regional transportation planning agencies and other transportation stakeholders across the state to identify interregional needs through the development such as documents that include the ITSP, the state rail plan, the various quarter plans that we're developing, including the ITIP. And we also ensure that the ITIP is consistent with the regional transportation plans. The other thing that I'll mention as well is, based off the statute, the RTIPs, they are financially constrained programming documents, and the proposed requirement here, seems to go above and beyond the scope of the document. And it seems more appropriate to have that type of planning level discussion in the regional transportation plans.
Okay,
All right.
Thank you.
And did you want me to talk about the other sections as well?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. And then for section 34A, definitely appreciate this section here, making sure that we're leveraging the latest approved ITSP to develop the ITIP, the 2022 ITIP. And the interesting thing here is, a lot has changed. There are, when you look at the 2015 document, the ITSP, there has, since the development of that, we've had a lot of different policy changes, including executive orders in 1919, 7920. We have CAPDI, which was just approved and released by CalSTA. We've developed the CTP 2050. We've developed the 2020 Freight Mobility Plan, as well as the State Rail Plan. So there's just been a lot of changes. And so it is critically important for us to be able to utilize the 2021 ITSP to guide the development of the 2022 ITIP. And we understand that there were some concerns about timing of the development of the ITIP and the ITSP. And for that reason, we do want to make sure that, there is a well vetted out process that allows us to develop the ITIP, leveraging the ITSP as that framework. So we are adjusting our schedule to approve the ITSP draft before the ITIP hearings. And so before we submit our draft to the commission, we would have that 2021 ITSP completed. And I think that will resolve a lot of the timing issues. We are going to be releasing the ITSP draft document at the beginning of August. which will give stakeholders plenty of time to review the documents. We're going to be holding 3 workshops to get stakeholder input. And we'll definitely be talking about the ITIP criteria that we'll be utilizing to help that development process. And so, so for that reason, we do feel that the 2021 document should be inserted into this language, just to make sure that that's being called out.
Okay.
You want me to go to the next? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Yeah. So I think it would be a great idea, but not knowing what the sections to include ours, it will be difficult for us to kind of, since we have really not seen it. So then the question I guess I have is, would these things, because I did put their section under development based on our conversations. So would these things be addressed in the ITSP? That there is no need for us to put them in the STIP guidelines?
Are you talking about sections B and C? Yeah.
Yes.
So I have some comments on those if you well, let me run through those real quick.
Yes.
Yeah. So for 34 B and C, so requiring needs and deficiencies, and so there are a couple of things that we want to lay out here. So similar to section 20G, B and C seem to be a little bit redundant for us, and it duplicates existing planning efforts. And so, we're already working and collaborating with stakeholders across the state to identify interregional needs and deficiencies. And I talked about the plans, ITSP, state route plan, corridor planning, et cetera. And, given the scope of the ITIP, there are some pretty explicit requirements in statute that, identifies what needs to go into the ITIP, with it being financially constrained and a very focused document. And so, yeah, so we're just, we just have a lot of questions about how to go about doing this. And one of the challenges that we have too, with this being a fairly new proposed change is, with it exceeding sort of the statutory requirements, it does create a considerable new workload for Caltrans. We're already very much focused on delivering the ITSP, and basically this requirement will force us to divert some of those resources to be able to address some of these changes. But also it may impact our schedule for the 2022 ITIP, because it basically accounts for what we always have submitted. And maybe our folks from the financial programming team can elaborate on that. But yeah, but given that these are above and beyond the scope that we typically deal with the ITIP, it is a bit of a challenge for us to be able to deliver the document in a timely manner for both of them, the ITSP and the ITIP.
Okay. So I can then I will continue to work with you and see what is a reasonable then ask or request. And if to the extent that these are addressed in your ITSP, I think we would be okay. And but we can continue kind of have the discussions. Okay.
Sure. And just one quick thought, and this is sort of the challenges, and I'll just use this just as a recent example, the California Transportation Plan 2050, right? So that document is providing, like an overarching planning framework to inform all the different work that's happening, not only with Caltrans, but throughout the state. And with that document, we do have a implementation piece to that, right? That sort of gets into sort of the nitty gritty. And I would almost say that, there's a similar situation with the ITSP, right? Where, we have an overarching framework. So we have the regions that are doing, the regional planning. They're focusing in on what's happening within their regions. And then from a statewide perspective, what we're looking at is making sure that we're providing a planning framework that's helping to inform all the corridor planning that's happening out there. You know, to ensure that there's consistency and making sure that we have a, you know, an integrated system, you know, as we think about some of these longer trips. And so, you know, it's sort of like the chicken or the egg problem, if you will, where, you know, when you look at a lot of these needs, and for us to really understand what really needs to move forward, you know, there needs to be analysis behind that work, right? And so you know, what we're looking at is having the ITSP, you know, really look at kind of the overarching framework, and then at the corridor level, that analysis that's being done, and what we really need to do is make sure, and to the point that you guys are making, we need to sort of close the loop on that. You know, I understand the need to have sort of a statewide understanding of what are all the needs are. But you know, so there's almost, I think, similar to the CTV 2050, there's almost kind of an implementation piece, maybe that you guys are getting at here. But I think that falls, you know, above and beyond the scope of the ITIP. You know, so I think there are other mechanisms for us to help that issue. But really, at the end of the day, you know, we want to make sure that the corridor planning and the right analyses are being done to really justify the needs of the system. And that can't be done necessarily, you know, at this stage in the ITSP, if that makes sense.
Right. And so then how are you going to be making ITIP recommendations if you cannot really pinpoint to the needs? So I guess that's, yeah, so.
Well,
so,
you know, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, that's my,
Yeah, you know, and one of the things that I'll mention is kind of going back to the last agenda item, right? You look at what we have in our pipeline. You know, there's what was about 156 million, if I remember correctly, you know, in the ITIP. And you look at all the projects that and we provided this information to you guys, but you look at all the projects that we have in our pipeline, rail and highway, that have been funded out of the STIP or the ITIP, you know, there's roughly, you know, in excess of $900 million, and we only have 156 million. So you just do a simple calculation, it's over 6 cycles of just the existing projects that we have. So, you know, but speaking to your point though, you know, we do have to help informing, you know, some of the decision making that we have in this process. You know, we do have the ITIP scoring criteria, you know, and so that's definitely going to be a data point for us to be able to look at to ensure, you know, consistency with the ITSP. You know, but it's a challenge, right? I mean, we have a lot of different needs. You know, we have a big policy shift that we're trying to make in the state. You know, we have all these pipeline projects, and it's just going to be, you know, just a lot of different discussions that we're going to have in terms of how to move things forward. So anyway, I just wanted to put that into context.
Right, and you know what, I totally get it, but what I also, you know, throughout the STIP guidelines, as well as in statute, even throughout the statute that governs the STIP, everything is about the partnerships. And so that is kind of really where the commission wants to make sure that you are working in partnerships with the regional agencies. And you know, we don't expect there, you know, the large projects that have been delivered with ITIP funding have not been delivered with ITIP funding alone. It has always been in partnerships with your regional partners. And so we want to make sure that continues, because that is not really the expectation, because, you know, specifically with these very large mega projects, that is really, it's not doable, not with the 156 million you have. But the regional partners do have their regional shares. They also have local funding available. So that is kind of really where we want to make sure that doesn't get lost, that the partnerships are still there, that you're working with your regional partners to identify the needs and what is really important and priorities to the state. And so I think that is really one of the things that we are mostly very want to make sure that it doesn't get lost, that collaboration, it continues. And so and we can continue having this conversation. And so thank you for all your comments, Marlon. And
more comment on section 34D.
Oh yeah, can you scroll down, please?
Yeah.
More, right there.
Yeah.
So no, you went too far. Up. Yes, stop. Okay.
Yeah, so this is actually one we're really passionate about. You know, this has actually been identified in the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. You know, and one of the things that we're doing, and the reason why, you know, we're supportive of highways to boulevard, but we're just not necessarily sure it's the best fit in terms of the ITIP, and I want to tell you why. So we are in the process of actually implementing highways to boulevards on a larger scale. So one of the things that I want to talk about is, you know, it's basically one component, highways to boulevard, of a more comprehensive reconnecting communities program that we're developing. And so we actually submitted a USDOT RAISE application to actually stand up a program. It's going to be focused on enhancing and providing multimodal connectivity in communities burdened and scarred by the construction of highway and freeways. And so our program includes, you know, we're going to have 5 locations where we're targeting community engagement. We're going to have a transformative community engagement to understand the needs that you know, that the communities have in terms of highways being a barrier, understanding what those needs are to reconnect, and then identify what future capital projects that can actually reconnect the communities. We also have a statewide guidebook that we're looking to develop for more broader implementation at different locations. And so really the outcome of the Reconnecting Communities program will be to develop, you know, community-focused projects, including highways and boulevard, right? It's because highways and boulevard is just one solution. You know, so there may be other types of solutions, including freeway caps and other types of things of that nature. And the goal would be, you know, once we start developing this program, we're going to be getting projects, you know, that could be part of future ITIP cycles. And so, but I guess the short end of it is, you know, we could use a little bit more time to actually develop this. And it will be worthwhile maybe having a future agenda item at a future meeting where we can talk a little bit more to you guys about this.
Yeah, so then what I'm hearing is that we're a little premature on this concept. Is that it's a great concept, but premature. Okay, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. I think we do have a couple of questions, Marlon, so please hang on. So, okay.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. Yes, we do have 2 comments and 2 questions at this time. I'll start with the 2 comments. They both come from Julia Randolph. She writes, Coalition for Clean Air agrees with Marlon on 20G. It undermines the engagement process in the ITIP and ITSP, where there is greater public engagement. She follows up with, we also agree with Marlon on 34AD as well. We should be using the 2021 ITSP draft, which is informed by a cap tie. This section does not have the cap tie provisions we believe that it should have. Thank you. And now for the first question, this comes from Steve Bertlebo. He asks, how do the needed reductions in VMT to cut GHG emission affect the planning process?
I'm going to have to, how do the new GHG reduction affect the planning process? the ITSP, I'm thinking?
How do the needed reductions in VMT to cut GHG emission affect the planning process?
I think that is, yeah. Please, Marlon.
Yeah. So yeah, everything really starts with the CTB 2050, which we did a lot of work around the need to justify a VMT reduction, for the purpose of reducing greenhouse gases, and we can say that in the draft ITSP, we do have some policies around VMT reduction. And really that should be carrying over in terms of some of the other work that would be helping to inform the development of the ITIP. So yeah, so it is accounted for. It's also a pretty prominent piece in the CAPDI, and so there is consistency between CAPDI and the ITSP, and so hopefully that helps.
Yeah. So I think, in terms of questions in regards to the timing, a comment about being consistent with the draft ITSP, that is really the bigger concern in terms of timing. We are hoping to get a draft ITSP, since the ITIP must be consistent with the ITSP, and we don't have that information available to none of the regional partners or the CTC. That is one of the reasons why we are concerned as to whether or not that document will have this information. And so timing is all. And so I'm hoping to get something, we'll get something soon that we can react to, so that we can be more comfortable in terms of what it is in terms of the system needs. Those cannot be lost. I think as we move forward with the new state goals, it is very important that we make sure that, we have been in a trajectory, and not that necessarily that is the right way to continue, but there needs to be a purpose. It needs to be purposely as to how we're moving forward. There's been a lot of investments, and there's a reason why those investments and certain expectations. And so as long as everyone is informed and we're informed as to where we're moving towards, I think that will be very useful. So for everyone, these sections, we're still working on them. And as you heard, Marlon, they have concerns in terms of adding these sections to the guidelines. And so we will continue developing the guidelines and any changes. As always, we will be posting them on our website, and if we need to have another conversation, we will. But I think, do we have any other questions and comments? Okay, we have one more on this section, and then we can move on to the next one. Go ahead.
Yes, the next written question comes from Patricia Chen. Question from Marlon. I heard you mention the scoring criteria for the ITIP. Will those be reflected in the STIP guidelines? If not, where would we look for those? Thank you.
Marlon, that was for you.
Yeah, so they will be an appendix in the ITSP. And so when we release our draft at the beginning of August, you'll be able to see those.
Okay. Thank you, Marlon. Okay.
And at this time, we have one attendee with their hand raised. Mike Woodman, you are free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hi, this is Mike Woodman, Chair of the North State Super Region, representing the 16 Northern California RTPAs and MPOs. Teresa, I appreciate Marlon's comments and concerns, and appreciate CTC's willingness to continue the dialogue, because I think, from the North State Super Region perspective, our perspective is probably a little bit different than the department's. And I heard some of the other folks comment on Section 20G. 20G is focused on the Regional Improvement Program. And when you talk about identifying, what the regions believe are the most significant interregional highway or intercity rail needs, we update our regional transportation plans every 4 to 5 years, but our commission members change, our citizens, drive what's important to the commission, and the commission may decide that, one of our interregional priorities that was identified in the regional transportation plan, for example, is no longer their top priority, and they may switch horses midstream. So I think this is important. It allows us to let the CTC know what our true top priority is based on the current needs in our region. So I would continue to support the language in 20G. When you look at the new language in sections 34B and 34C, I appreciate that, Caltrans is doing the multimodal corridor planning efforts, and those efforts will help to identify some of those gaps and needs. But, when we talk about the ITIP and the interregional highway improvement projects, and even the intercity rail projects, it's important to know what funds have been committed to those projects, how much of those corridors, remain to be completed. And it's just a little concerning to, put that discussion off. We've brought up a similar issue in the North State Super Region meeting, as well as the Rural Counties Task Force meeting, asking Caltrans to provide us with that information, and they have yet to provide that information for us. And I was at the CTC meeting when Director Weiss asked Caltrans to provide similar information. And, it's been, can't tell you how many months, but, you talk about timing. I don't know, timing's necessarily the issue. It's just, that's information that we should all have. It should be public information, and we should know what's left and understand those corridors. And if there's issues in those corridors that remain to be completed, we should focus on completing them, especially in some of these smaller rural corridors. We talk about, partnership of interregional improvement program funding and the regional improvement program funding. And in these smaller rural corridors, if there's not a continued partnership with interregional improvement program funding and regional improvement program funding, your Caltrans is basically walking away from completing those corridors and leaving them in an uncompleted state. So it is an important conversation that we need to have, and we can continue to, work with Caltrans and work with the CTC, and maybe we can figure it out, outside of the guidelines process. But it is critical information that we need to have, CTC needs to have, and the department needs to be able to provide. So those are all the comments I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So we can, okay. So then we're going to continue, we will continue working on this section, and we will update you all accordingly, okay? So with that, I kind of want to go to section 49, page 27, please. And this is in regards to cost sharing, basis for cost sharing. Most of our projects in the STIP have multiple fund sources. It is more common now to have SHOP, to have interregional funds as well as regional funds. You scroll down, it's at the section, page 27. Right there, okay. And so one of the things that okay, as I was saying, it is not common to have state dollars as well as local dollars participate in a highway project or a large project. And so what we want to make sure is that the agreements that are entered into between the state as well as the local agency, they are consistent with the guidelines of the program, the state program that is funding that is contributing to the funds. So in this section, I will be adding that agreements entered into by the state and the regions be consistent with the program guidelines. This, I know this is more of a, it's kind of common sense, but it could get lost, especially for projects that are, you know, that last a very, very long time, or projects that do get segmented and they do take a long time to get constructed, and there's different fund sources that enter into the project. And it is important to note that if we are a funding partner, the state needs to, we need to make sure all the funding agreements are consistent with the program guidelines that are funding the program. So it is gonna, I'm gonna add a little sentence to that section, section 49. So then we go to section 64, page 36. Page 36. So if you go up a little bit more, please. Up, stop, right there. Okay, another area, if you scroll down a little bit, please. See? Okay, right there, thank you. Another area that I will be adding clarifying language is on the design build type of projects. These particular projects, as you know, they are, they're design build, so therefore the design phase, the right-of-way phase, and the construction phase is combined as one allocation. So how we are programming these projects, we're looking into it because we may have to shift it a little bit. I am working with our shop folks as well, so that we can come up, because you know, we can come up with a better way of programming these projects. It may be that the way we're programming are appropriate, but we just kind of want to make sure, because we are seeing these type of projects more often. And as well as the timely use of funds for these type of projects. You know, we have specific timely use of funds provisions for design phase, the right-of-way phase, as well as the construction phase. So when we have a design build type of a project, we have not built in a reasonable or a more appropriate timely use of funds for these type of projects. So just kind of wanted to give you the heads up. I'm going to be adding some language to this section as it relates to just design build type of projects. On that particular section as well, if you scroll down, Casey, please, at the bottom of page 36. We did have a comment in regards to FTA transfers and when it was appropriate to advertise or not. And so I think that is also a very good comment, because I believe it's FHWA funds, you cannot advertise prior to allocation, but if it's state-only funds as well as or transferring funds to the FTA, that is permissible. So I did have that comment from an agency, and I thought it was a worthwhile comment for us to differentiate between projects that are state-only funds and or FTA transfers that risk advertising prior to allocation could be permissible at the risk of the agency, of course. So I kind of wanted to let you know that I will be looking into that section and possibly adding something to that section. Timely use of funds. Oh, we have a question?
For clarity on section 34, page 36. I'll read through the comments.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Teresa. We have a clarifying question from Dominica Smith. Section 64, page 36, allocation of funds, existing language, projects using design build or design sequencing, procurement shall be identified at the same time of programming or as soon as possible prior to allocation. The allocation may be a combined amount to include design, right-of-way, and construction. Proposed language, when allocating a design build project, readiness includes environmental but not design. When allocating a design right-of-way construction project, neither design nor right-of-way certification are required. And then she says clarity would be appreciated.
Okay, perfect. Yes, yes, I will look into that language, and if appropriate, I will update that section. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Excuse me. Yes, within the same section 64, page 36, allocation of funds existing language is under the STIP implementation section. Existing language mentions FTA transfers, but does not mention any ability to allocate CON funds prior to PSE right-of-way and or EIR certification. Proposed language, utilize language from the ATP guidelines, section 29. Caltrans shall make a recommendation to the Commission regarding the readiness of the project for allocation using the same criteria used by the FTA. Thank you.
Okay, I will look at the ATP language that you referenced, and I'm going to see how we can to see if it's appropriate for us to add. So definitely that is something I can consider. Thank you. Okay, thank you. The next one, and I'm just going to briefly talk like the timely use of funds policy. I will, as I said earlier on design build, we're going to look into the timely use of funds for those particular type of delivery methods. I don't anticipate us changing them for any other delivery methods, but if you have any concerns, questions, please let me know. Please note, the interim timely use of funds policy has expired as of June 30th, so we revert back to how we were prior to the pandemic. Okay, so with that, I think those are the only major changes that I have on the STIP guidelines. Besides, you know, just making little typographical corrections. I think that is it. I will like to open it up for any final comments or questions before I go through to the next steps.
All right, thank you, Teresa. We have one written question at this time that comes from Rachel Marconi. She writes, regarding uncommitted funding, since almost all the 2022 STIP capacity is in fiscal year 25-26 through 26-27, will next SCCP, LPP, TCEP cycles also go through fiscal year 26-27? If not, would it make sense for this policy procedure to be modified to give regions until 6 months after the SCCP, LPP, TCEP programming cycle that goes through fiscal year 26-27 are adopted to identify other funds or identify substitute projects?
Whoa, Rachel, that was a long one. You know what? I am open to looking into uncommitted funds. Definitely, I will look in your comment, because that has always been a challenge for us. And so, you know, I'll work with Matthew to see when those, you know, the funding times for SCCP, TCEP, as well as local partnership, and where they fall those years that they're funding in the next cycle, and see how they match here. But I'm open to flexibility, but enough flexibility to allow you to deliver your project, but not where it's gonna tighten the STIP and box the STIP, which is kind of what happened in the past. So I am always open to allow that type of flexibility and allow regions to utilize their STIP shares for that type. So I'll look into it a little bit more, and I'll kind of, if I need to revisit, I'll make sure to let you know what areas I've updated. So with that, if you have more comments, or if you have written comments, I know I have received some from a few of you. Thank you. I am going to give you until I'm gonna open it up for continue to receive comments up to this Friday, which is July 23rd. And the reason I need to have your final comments by that time is that I need to have sufficient time to update the guidelines so that I can distribute to you all before then, because I would like for you to react to them prior to the commission meeting. I wouldn't want you to see changes as the commission book is published. So your comments by this Friday, the 23rd would be wonderful. If for some reason you are unable to provide me comments and you think of things, I'm always available by email or phone call if you need to just talk internally. So with that, the fund estimate with the share distribution and the guidelines will be adopted by the commission at the August commission meeting. That's August, let me see, the 18th and the 19th. I anticipate this item being on the first day. So with that, I don't think I have any more comments. You know, I finished 5 minutes before we are to conclude, so I'm giving you guys 5 minutes back. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. Justin, Casey, thank you for helping me. And please give me a call if you have any questions or concerns. I will wait until I receive all comments and hopefully have something to you at our website updates, the updates that I talked about by early next week. So with that, thank you very much. And that's it.